As I said, this is a really important session. Over the last number of years, certainly since I've been at Vicsport, we've got a lot of phone calls over the journey in regard to this topic. There's obviously been some changes legislation-wise which are going to impact on all of us in the room in one way or another. So it certainly is an important topic, and it's obviously a serious issue. The theme of this session is to really focus on the incoming standards, but it's the beginning of a number of programs and services that Vicsport will be working with you guys on and offering to the industry to support in this area. And I know Fiona will cover some of that in her session a bit later on. One of the things I wanted to really highlight was there's the compliance side, so there'll be the legislation side, and there'll be these are the 5 things, or whatever the number is, that organisations need to do to comply. But I think that one of the main messages from today is compliance is only one aspect of this issue. It's actually about the environment and the culture that is created in our sporting clubs and in sporting environments to make sure that any issues of child safety, safeguarding, etc., there's a comfort factor for those to come to the surface and be addressed, and that's not just ticking a box in a policy sense. So yes, there's the compliance and the policy side, but we did want to highlight today that this is also about the environment side. So hopefully that's a big part of some of the discussions today.
So today we're here to talk about the child safe standards, obviously, and the purpose of today is to outline those standards and their impact on all of you as Victorian sports. So think of this as, I guess, the 101 on the standards. It will be fairly high level. Some sports have already taken, I guess, different approaches. Some have been very proactive already, so I do apologise if there's anything that you're across, but I guess it's the nature of covering a lot of different sports, and this is one area where everyone can go about it differently. So on to the standards. Standard 1 is, I guess, a high-level overarching standard which all the rest flow from. So strategies to embed an organisational culture of child safety, including through effective leadership arrangements. Despite a lot of buzzwords in that title, it is, I guess, it's the broad overarching standard. And as Mark said, this one's about driving that environment and that cultural change within your organisation. Standard 2 is a child safe policy or a statement or commitment to child safety. This is one area where I know some sports here today will know that this is particularly a standard that Landers have been focusing on, as it's a clear objective document that we can help sports put together. So standard 3, as I said, sits sort of alongside a child safe policy, and that's a code of conduct. This is, I guess, the really detailed sort of outline of what is or what is not acceptable. So I've seen sports go about this in a range of ways, and it can be quite detailed or it can be quite high level, but this sort of really outlines behavioural and expectations and boundaries for the real hands-on stuff. Standard 4, where we move on to screening and, I guess, focusing on the type of people that are brought into your organisation. When we say screening, a lot of people sort of, I guess, the natural reaction is to think working with children checks and think that's it. And that's something I want to stress against. Coming out of the Royal Commission, one of the key learnings was that working with children checks are great, but they're not a 100% fail-safe system. So it's important to think, well, they're good, but what can we do on top of that? So standard 5, as I said earlier, this is where sort of scope comes in for sports to consider their own scenario and think what works for us, how should we tackle the standards. They do start to get a bit more abstract from here on. As you can see, this one is processes for responding to and reporting suspected child abuse. So processes can be varied, but the focus needs to be on creating that supportive environment so that children know what is wrong, what should be reported, how, where, all those type of things. Really creating that atmosphere that they feel comfortable doing so. And that's not just children, that can be parents as well. It sounds, or adults, any adults. So sort of sitting alongside that standard is strategies for a sport to identify and reduce or remove totally the risk of abuse. This is sort of that risk management awareness that sports need to have, and that can be at state level, regional level, club level, etc. And it's really a need to sit back and think, what is it about our sport? Where do the risks arise? And this is the final standard, which is standard 7, strategies to promote the participation and empowerment of children. Again, fairly broad. And this is very interrelated with what I touched on before about making sure children understand what is right, what is wrong, and where do I go if something happens. I'll just touch on these principles, which are, this is part of the legislation, they're applicable to all the standards, and it's an important, I guess the need is to focus on areas of the population where there's more risk or greater risk, and that's, so when people are thinking about the standards, all of them, it's important to think about the safety of Aboriginal children or children from other diverse backgrounds, whether that's culturally or linguistically. As well as children with a disability, as I mentioned before. So how can you comply? As I mentioned before, it's practices and policies, but it's definitely not one or the other. It's all well and good having the documents in place, but if they don't filter down to club level and people at that level don't know how to apply them, then they're not really worth very much. And that the DHHS really wants to see a focus on that culture and environment. That's the most important aspect about this.
With a lot of culture change work that I've been involved in over the last few years, it really does start at the top. And it's vitally important that this conversation is had at the board table. The board needs to be across the standards, they need to know what's going on, and if the board doesn't set the tone and set the culture, then it's not going to filter down to your grassroots. As I touched on, child safety is everybody's responsibility. It's not just one person in the organisation that writes the documents and tries to get the message out. Every staff member, every board member, down to every coach and volunteer needs to know about this because everybody is responsible for it. So in regards to resources, the information sheets will be out next week. The templates will then be out on a staggered basis, and we'll continually be communicating with all the SSAs and RSAs and our broader membership to advise you of that. In regards to face-to-face support, we're employing a 3-step approach with this. So the first one is obviously today, the industry forum, which is essentially that information session, providing you with an overview and helping you move forward. In coming weeks, we will have small group workshops, and I'll discuss them in the following slide. And we've secured some additional funding from the Commission for Children with Young People to develop a Train the Trainer program so that we can train some of your staff to therefore assist your clubs and associations. Support and resources available. Obviously, Vicsport is here to assist you through that. I'm leading the work at Vicsport, so feel free to contact me if you need. The Commission for Children and Young People, that's their phone number, email and website there. They have a number of practical templates and resources available. The Department of Health and Human Services that Tom mentioned, their details are up here as well. A lot of information around, there's some really good resources from both organisations around creating a child-safe organisation and ensuring you comply with the standards and understanding what they mean. So the next steps, this is what we are strongly encouraging you to consider doing. As has been discussed, there is no one specific way that every organisation must follow to achieve the standards, but this is what we'd be recommending to you. Develop a working group or subcommittee Okay, don't just leave this to one person. This is something that a number of people should be involved in, and I would be encouraging a number of people at high level within your organisation, wherever possible. Undertake the review, figure out what you've got, what you haven't got, what you can adjust that you already have, and with that start to put in place, do the safety review, but through that also understand your level of risk. So different sports will to a degree have a different level of risk purely based on the activity and the engagement with children. So a sport that has a lot more physical contact in some areas may be at a higher risk than others, but again, it's understanding what you do, how you do it, and where the risks could be. Identify any further information and support you might require. There's going to be questions that come out of it, but then most importantly, develop an action plan, prioritise it, and just start working your way through it one by one. I can't encourage you enough how important it is about ensuring you've got the culture in place. Everyone knows that documents and policies get written and they just sit on a shelf. So ensure you actually focus on creating that safe culture and that safe environment for everyone within your sport. This isn't an add-on, it's not a one-off exercise. This has to continue moving forward, and at the end of the day, it is the law.